You're listening to the podcast for all of the news, notes, and breakdowns for your Ohio State Buckeyes. This is Sons of the Shoe with Nick Wilson and Spencer German.
Yes, I know it's not really Nick Wilson and Spencer German. It's Jake Vulinec and Spencer German. But happy to be with you guys this morning to react to the Buckeyes' absolutely dominant win over the Tennessee Volunteers. I know we usually like to do these shows after the game immediately. Just schedules and weirdness and whatever. I was traveling to Cincinnati for the Browns game today, so just a lot going on. But man, Jake, where to even start with this game? Because I think like we were waiting for that type of performance from the Buckeyes really all season, and we hadn't really seen anything like that since the first several weeks of the season when they were playing the Marshalls and the Akrons and the Western Michigans of the world. And to do it on that stage was incredible. I'll tell you, like, I think I had two thoughts on the first drive of the game. Thought number one was, I think this game is over, which I know it was still so early at that point, but it felt like there was just a different vibe about this team on that opening drive. And my second thought was, where was this game plan against Michigan? I don't want to have like the revisionist history thing, but that was the thing that I think was perplexing, was like, this is the team that can beat anybody in the country. And we saw it on the opening drive, and it was brilliant, and I think set the tone for the rest of the game. Yeah,
it's crazy what happens when one of the strongest wide receiver corps in all of college football, probably the strongest wide receiver corps in all of college football, actually gets the ball thrown to them. It's wild. It's wild. You come out and you spank around the Tennessee team, who a lot of people were predicting would come in and either beat Ohio State or play Ohio State really, really close. And it ended up being, I mean, this game was over from, like you said, practically the first moment it started. Like, you thought it was over basically after 7-0. I can tell you, I definitely thought it was over after 21-0. I was not sitting there going, I don't know, watch out for Tennessee. Like, no. This Ohio State offense scoring 3 times in 3 drives.
Yeah.
Toast.
Well, and they almost made it 4 times in 4 drives, if not for the interception in the end zone. That was kind of a fluky thing, obviously. The ball was tipped in the air. Jeremiah Smith almost had it, got to get kind of a crazy acrobatic interception in the back of the end zone.
Right.
And I think I saw there was a lot of clamoring on social media for that to be DPI anyway. So, yeah, like it almost was 28-0 to start the second quarter. Like it could have been even worse. And, for all the talk, we talked so much on this podcast, Jake, about the fast starts and the lack of them, and they couldn't score touchdowns in opening drives and all these different things. To see them come out the way they did and score a touchdown on the opening drive and then follow it up with 2 more touchdown drives. Because how many times did they like maybe score on the first drive or score on the second drive, but then go scoreless for like the next like rest of the first quarter and part of the second quarter, right? Like you have like a lot of like 7-3, 10-7 games after the first quarter. To see them just like touchdown, almost another touchdown. I mean, this was the best this offense has looked all year. And it was like the exact thing that we were sort of waiting for and hoping for from this team. And they did it on the biggest stage. Like that can't be understated. For all the talk about, like you said, Tennessee coming in, and I was even nervous about it. So much so that like I was willing to pick Tennessee to win this game because I thought they were going to dominate in the trenches. They got like there was moments in that game where it looked like Tennessee didn't even want to be there. Like they weren't ready for the moment at all. And Ohio State on the flip side looked like the world beaters we thought they could be at the start of the season.
Yeah, I mean, Tennessee looked like little brother out there. Like, as bad as that is to say, like, listen, I don't mind hating on an SEC team, okay? It's never going to hurt my soul when I have to trash the SEC. But, like, the big talk was basically, Ryan Day can't win the big one. Ohio State coming in is, one of the really good teams, but could lose this Tennessee team, the 3rd best team in the SEC. And you put it on the SEC. Like it was, okay, this was a team that was a hair away from competing for your SEC championship. They got embarrassed. It was this guy, you're putting out the freshman at quarterback? I mean, he's getting abused out there. Looked actually really good with his legs. He just struggled really a lot with his arm. But, like, he was getting abused. He did not have time in the pocket. The Ohio State defensive line was putting him on him. I mean, the defensive line, that was probably their best game. Like we talk about best games from the offense.
We'll get into Will Howard here in a second because obviously he was phenomenal. We have a ton to say about him. Even Ryan Day, I think from a coaching standpoint and a schematic standpoint and what they were doing was brilliant. But that defensive line, like for all the criticisms this year about like they can't generate pressure, they can't do anything. I mean, Jake, we talked about it. We saw it on the tape. Like Tennessee's offensive line are some big dudes. They got like 340-pound guys. Like they are not a small group. And I thought for sure, like given how this defensive line had been this year at times, where they're just getting like pushed backwards and Oregon sort of owned them, for them to do what they did. And again, it's a freshman quarterback. You know, he doesn't have quite like he doesn't have the football IQ yet, or like the body clock, the clock in his head that like a veteran guy would. There's some growing pains there for him. But they were just through the first quarter, Ohio State had more sack yards, I believe, than Tennessee had total yards. Like it was pure domination by a group that we've had questions about this season. And again, it was on both sides of the ball. It was just everything you wanted to see.
Yeah, Jack Sawyer was absolutely incredible. JTT was, I think he had the first sack. Like even when they weren't getting actual sacks and putting Nico on the ground, it was like a lot of hurries. Everything from the Tennessee offense had to be like quick, short yardage. I think he averaged like under 4 yards of completion. It was absolutely insane. Like even the passes he was completing were not going far downfield just because it was so much pressure, had to get it out so fast. Like that unit was unreal, and a big reason why they were so dominant in the game. Like, yeah, you put up 21-0. It then goes back to, okay, the defense has to hold. The defensive line, I mean, they didn't even let a lot of those plays get started. It was masterclass by the Ohio State defensive line. Honestly, across the board from them. There was not one spot in this game where I thought Tennessee had a chance.
The only moment I think there was like a glimmer was after they scored before the half and made it an 11-point game, 21-10. And Ohio State did the thing. Like they got into field goal range. We all knew Fielding wasn't making that damn field goal. Like nobody in their right mind knew he couldn't hit the chip shots against Michigan. He's not hitting a 56-yarder. There was just there was no way.
This dude couldn't hit he couldn't water if he fell off a boat. Okay, like it's. I have no trust in
into the river. It would have missed the river. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
No, but then we knew Tennessee was going to get the ball to half, and that was the moment I said okay, this first drive out of the half is going to establish the way this game is going to go. Tennessee's either going to march down the field and score and make it a one-score game, and then the pressure is going to be back on Ohio State, or Ohio State's going to come out like they did in the first half and just shut things down. And they did that, got them off the field quickly, and then went and scored themselves. And at that moment, you just knew that was it. You knew that was game. They had slammed the door in their face, and it was game over. I am blown away by the performance last night on so many different fronts. I mean, the secondary played really well. They didn't have to do a ton because the defensive line was so good. They'll get really tested next week. We know that. We'll talk a little bit about that game. We'll preview it more. Hopefully we can get Alec Dietz, who's been on a couple times with us, to help us preview the Oregon game coming up. But yeah, as a whole, Jim Knowles had the perfect game plan. He was dialing up blitzes at the right time. He mixed and matched well, and that's what you have a guy like that for. That's what you recruit these players for. I'm blown away by the fact that on the biggest stage, they were able to put that Michigan game behind them, everything that came with it, and give you a performance that felt very Ohio State-esque. And then on the flip side, man, the offense, I'm sure we want to hit on Jeremiah Smith too. I mean, we obviously got to hit on the run game and the ability of this offensive line to actually create opportunities for the run game to work. But I think it all starts with Will Howard because, again, similar to the defense has been the one stable thing where we've said that defense can win a national championship, even with some of the warts they had with Igbenogson getting called for all the DPIs and Denzel Burke just getting burnt all the time. We still felt like that defense was going to hold their own on the biggest stages, and they did. Will Howard, though, he was a roller coaster ride. There was games where we were he could be brilliant. The Oregon game, he played really, really well, and it was okay, this guy can be the guy. And then the Michigan game made me rethink everything about him. And he was on another level of incredible last night. I mean, he looked like the guy that you went and got in the portal to win you games in the playoff. He was standing in the pocket. Ball was on the money. He was dropping some freaking dimes across all over the field. Jeremiah Smith, most notably, was his go-to guy. But like, it was just a phenomenal, like, that was an epic Ohio State quarterback performance last night from Will Howard.
Yeah, I think for the feeling going in on Will Howard was sort of this, okay, prove to me which guy you are. Are you the guy that showed up against Michigan in the big games? Are you going to be the guy who showed up for, I mean, what felt like 9 or 10 games this season where you came through and you hit in the big moments, and he wasted no time. He came out immediately and showed you what he was going to be. I mean, Spencer, 24 for 29 for 311 yards, 2 touchdowns, and obviously the odd like interception.
Yeah, which wasn't. I mean, it wasn't.
Yeah,
he threw
it's
in
not a bad interception,
but it wasn't like it was his fault because it actually hit Jeremiah Smith's hands. Like, yeah, it was just a weird play. Yeah.
Yeah, like he was on fire. Not to mention added almost 40 yards on the ground. Like everything he did was like, okay, yeah, that's the guy you went out and recruited, and probably even a little bit more. I don't know that Ohio State fans even expected that out of the guy that you were going to get in from Kansas State. Like, if he plays like that, Ohio State is borderline unbeatable.
Yeah.
If he can put together a performance like that. Like, Jeremiah Smith had free reign. And honestly, that's what I want to see, though. Like, Will Howard's trust in Jeremiah Smith against Tennessee was exactly the trust that I want to see. He was just literally there were plays where he's just like, all right, and several times Jeremiah one-on-one coverage, I'm not even waiting for this play to develop. I'm just tossing it over there.
Because and the balls were like pinpoint accuracy. Like it,
yep.
And I honestly thought too, the ball, I think it was on the second drive, the ball to Ibuka that was like over his right shoulder. Defender was like right there. That was probably the throw of the night for Howard. Like,
yep.
He squeezed that thing in a window where like the DB almost was able to make a play on it and knock it down. And for him to drop it in the bucket the way he did, I was blown away. I think I sent you the GIF from Wolf of Wall Street where Leo's like biting his fist. That was me like just watching that game plan unfold and watching the way Will Howard was playing. It was unbelievable. And you're right. Like if he plays at that level, we talked so much about CJ Stroud and how Ryan Day wasted him, like, you know, that whole narrative. And like some of the throws he made that his second year there, especially, it was like, this guy's incredible. That felt like my reaction to Will Howard's game last night felt like a CJ Stroud game where he was dropping the ball in some places where I was like, he can do that. I mean, I was blown away. It was fantastic.
Yeah, fair to say. I think we've said it about 3 times this year, just from when I've joined, but like best Will Howard game of the season.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. Like that
wasn't even close.
That takes the cake without a question. And you mentioned like the Jeremiah Smith part of this. I was honestly surprised before the half that they tried that 56-yard field goal because I was kind of thinking like, what do you have to lose throwing a Hail Mary into the end zone with Jeremiah Smith on the receiving end? Like if you throw a pick, you throw a pick. Like who gives a shit? Like I honestly was like, take a shot, right? Like you have the one-handed catch god on your team, just like throw it up there and see if he magically comes down with it. And if he does, you're up 28-10 at the half.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, I wouldn't trust Jaden Fielding to, if you picked out a section of fans he had to kick the ball into that was in the lower bowl, I don't think he'd be able to do it if you set him up 3 yards in front of the wall. Like there's just no chance. I have zero faith in that kid at this point. Yeah. I don't know what to do with him. Like,
I mean, I here's the thing: if any of these games in the playoff, including the Oregon game next week especially, comes down to a field goal, none of us are going to be sitting there feeling good about it. We're all going to be like, this game is probably over. Like, and that makes me think back to like even the Oregon game, the first Oregon game. If they had gotten in field goal range, if the slide hadn't run the clock out, we think he's making that field goal to win the game?
Not now, I don't. I have zero faith to believe that he'd make that at this point. During the year, I was like, oh, I mean, you got a good shot. Like it's not necessarily a gimme, but he's got a good chance to make that. Now it's like, all right, turn my back to the screen, close my eyes, plug my ears, puke into the bucket, and then turn around and see what happens.
It feels very Nick Saban-esque that he has like a national championship caliber team that somehow is going to get spoiled because he can never just find good kickers. It was the weirdest thing for Nick Saban. That was the one area he seemed to neglect, and it always came back to – not always, but it would come back to bite him every so often. And I hope that's not the case with with this run for the Buckeyes potentially. But yeah, Will Howard's awesome. Jeremiah Smith was incredible, and I think that probably is a nice place to sort of transition into the game plan a little bit here, because making Smith the focal point should have been the thing in the Michigan game from the start. We know that. The fact that he was only targeted, two times the whole game, or in the second half or whatever it was, that's inexcusable. And they made a point on the opening drive, again, with a great throw to the end zone for the touchdown to him to end that first drive. Like, they clearly were like, we're going to use him in a variety of different ways. They used him in the run game even, and Tennessee had no answers. And like, this is why, listen, whatever's up with the Michigan thing, we're going to have to revisit that in the offseason. But like what we saw last night is a team that we know Chip Kelly's a great play caller. And he was in his bag last night, doing everything he could to put his team in a situation to be successful. I actually want to let's throw Radu's comment up here real quick, because he said they finally called an offensive game plan to avoid the deficiencies on the O-line. And I think that's massive, because he'd been doing that for several weeks. And then again, the Michigan game is the Michigan game. We'll revisit it. But when he's calling plays like that, that's what we expected. That's what we know Ohio State can be a national title contender. And like they're borderline unstoppable against maybe the only team that maybe can compete is Oregon in terms of like the athletes that they have. But like they're borderline unstoppable. So it was nice to see Chip get back to doing what we felt like he could do, because I understand the Michigan game was partly on him too. He's the play caller. But that's why it seems so weird, because we knew Chip hadn't called a game like that, like sort of scared and timid the entire season. So to see him get back to that was maybe the most encouraging. Maybe I shouldn't say the most encouraging thing, but it was one of the most encouraging things from last night as well. Because again, that offense, when he is taking advantage of the fact that like he has all these athletes and getting them in space, and they use the pass to set up the run, which is what they should have done against Michigan. They for some reason they were so heavy on like running the ball to set up the pass, and it was like, no, do the opposite. You have these otherworldly athletes on the outside, and it worked perfectly. And then they softened that defense up even more. And Tennessee then couldn't even stop the run. I mean, it was a perfect game plan from Chip. And again, gives you confidence that if he can do that and exploit the opponents that he's going to face weaknesses on defense, that they have a real shot at this thing.
Yeah, Spence, this is exactly what we called for going into the Michigan game. Was Chip Kelly, listen, you're down your top two offensive linemen right now. If you're going to be effective, not only throwing the ball, but also running it, you're going to have to get creative. Getting creative is exactly what he did in this game. He showed you, he had that the entire time, which just makes me think, Michigan, Ryan Day in your head, maybe the whole 9 yards, because he tried to just run at them straight up, where I know they highlighted on the broadcast. I'm not sure you saw that part or not, but it was a lot of like misdirection. It was almost not even a counter concept in terms of what the running back was doing, but you'd have the offensive line pull left, but then have the run of the play go right.
Yeah, it was like delayed, and there was a lot of like delayed handoffs in there. Yeah.
Right. Like you were just keeping the second level and the linebackers off balance, and then trusting in your offensive line to at least win the battle up front a little bit. And it was getting you into the second level, getting you 5, 7, 10 yards. Like it was perfect. And you had a lot of Will Howard rolling out. I know he rolled out to the left several times in that game, which you don't always see.
Yeah.
A lot of quick options. Like if you identify one-on-one coverage with Jeremiah Smith, just lob it up. Don't be afraid. Like that's just what you have to do. If you throw a pick off of it, you throw a pick off of it. We'll trust in Jeremiah. Like it was everything that we asked for, and it was executed perfectly. It just, you wonder why it wasn't in the Michigan game, but it makes you feel good that on the biggest stage possible, as these games are only going to get bigger and bigger, that he clearly showed it's not an incompetence to be able to do it, but just, it's sort of a learn from your mistakes thing, I guess.
The rollout plays with Will were fantastic. And that simply is, listen, we know our offensive line can be a weakness at times. Like, let's get him out of the pocket and get sort of him on the move where he can sort of see some things downfield. And, he doesn't have to stand there and just be a sitting duck at times if some guys might miss a block every now and then because they know that's going to happen. Now the question becomes like, can you translate that stuff now that it's on tape to the Oregon game and beyond, or a team's going to pick up on it? And how many teams that even can pick up on it can actually stop it? That's kind of the next question. I think Oregon, we saw, can at least keep pace with it. We'll see if they can also shut it down. And that makes me wonder too, because like what we saw last night was like peak Chip, peak this offense, peak everything. I almost wonder, Jake, if that was like the game plan that they had in like they had set for a rematch with Oregon, and they just didn't use it in the Michigan game because they didn't want to give a lot away, and then it came back to bite them because they thought they could probably beat that team without doing all that, and so then they unveiled it for this moment, and this is now like their playoff team offense, and this is what they were sort of working towards all season. I kind of had a thought about that last night. Like, did they just kind of save some things, and now they're unveiling it, and they're going to try to use it to run to a national championship? I mean, listen, I get why teams sometimes do that. They're not going to give everything away to opponents that they think that they're going to beat anyway. But like it just makes that game a little bit more perplexing, not to revisit it entirely. But yeah, like this looked like this is kind of what we expected. And to your point, like I don't know. I just kind of wondered that sort of in real time if they had maybe say if this was the version of the offense that we were kind of working towards if they had gotten to the Big Ten championship game.
I think this is more. Yeah, there was probably a little bit of that, but I think this was more like a 3-week realization of we could all see what happened and what went wrong in the Michigan game. You got to imagine every single coach can go back and look at that film and be like, well, it's pretty obvious what happened here, right? Yeah, we can listen to the fan base, we can listen to social media, but even with our own 2 eyes, it's pretty obvious what happened here. And I think it was like a realization 3 weeks for them where you go back and you're like, okay, we really have to assess what we're doing and maybe listen to a couple episodes of Sons of the Shoe, be like, hey, that Jake kid's pretty right. You do have to get creative. You do have to roll out. You got to do some interesting stuff.
Jake taking credit for the Ohio State game plan last night. I like it.
All I'm saying is Chip Kelly might be listening. He might be watching right now. I mean, if Chip wants to drop a comment in the YouTube, go ahead. No, but
Thank you, Jake.
Yeah.
Salute to you.
Yeah. With my absolute just masterful what I did, I was like, yeah, you just got to get Will Howard in some space, get him creative. And I was like, Chip can figure out how to do like the X's and O's part. I'll just sit from the back. Ohio State can hire me to be like, nah, it's too stagnant. Figure something else out.
You can be Ohio State's Paul DePodesta. How about that?
Yeah, it's probably the equivalent of what I'd be doing, which is nothing, by the way. But like, everything from Chip there, I think they just went back, looked at the tape, and was like, this is clearly not going to work. If we run this back out, we're going to get embarrassed. Ryan Day's probably sitting there. I'm going to lose my job if I ever try anything close to that again. And let's actually lean into what we're good at. And they did exactly that. It's good to see that when they have a bad moment, they're able to bounce back and sort of put things on the right track and learn from it. That was the biggest thing I take away. Like, for all intents and purposes of getting into the playoff in this season, the Michigan game meant nothing, right? Like, you're going to get in anyway. You're still going to host a game. Sure, like, your path changes a little bit. You don't get to play in the Big Ten championship. I'm not saying the game doesn't matter, but in terms of getting your season to go on, that game doesn't matter. So if you're going to sort of, fluke one, that's probably one of the games you want to fluke in a regular season that just didn't impact your playoff chances. So
I was just going to say, we can't get out of here without talking about Ryan Day and, like you said, sort of the bounce back effort after the Michigan game. I do want to hit on one other thing quickly, though, in relation to this, the offense. Real quick, Mateo says, we knew Ohio State was capable of this. We just hadn't seen it all season. That makes the Michigan game plan, or that's why the Michigan game plan doesn't make any sense. And again, I still do wonder if like this was kind of like an unveiling. Like they had this in their back pocket and they were just kind of waiting for the right time to really throw it out there. Again, in a rematch against Oregon that they were anticipating, and then it just, it didn't happen. But you're right. Like, we knew they were capable of this. The last thing I want to ask in relation to this offense in this game, how much more confidence do you have in the offensive line after that game last night in terms of being able to run the ball and out physical teams and be successful throughout this tournament where we know there's teams with flaws, but also you're playing the best?
So definitely more confident, right? There's no way you walk away feeling worse about that line. I just think when you employ a lot of the things that they did, it's not something that's going to work time in and time out again. Oregon's going to go back and watch the tape, and it's not going to be like you're going to run the exact same set of plays, the exact same style and concept, sort of the pull left but run right, and it's going to work every single time. Like, Oregon's going to identify that and be like, make sure their linebackers are staying pat, sitting on the play, not overreacting, which, could open up the other side of it. There's a lot of X's and O's that go into it. But yes, more confident. but they're going to have to get creative again. They're going to have to try things out. And I think you probably get a lot more aggressive Oregon defense, probably sends a lot more blitzes when they feel like you might be running. Even when you're dropping back, they're going to try to put pressure on Will Howard.
Yeah.
They're going to throw a lot
when
more.
You're trying to boot out of the pocket, like different stuff like that. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And that's going to be, this is the big test. I've already kind of said this on social media. For all intents and purposes, I think this game is the national championship. I think whoever wins this game next, I guess in a little over a week and a half on New Year's Day, I think that team's winning the championship. It's just straight up. Like if Ohio State beats Oregon, I think the momentum is going to be insurmountable. I think they'll keep riding it all the way. If Oregon wins, I think their path is pretty clear because I think they're the best team in the field, even more so than Ohio State. So that I'm putting my stamp on that claim right now. Or on that take right now. But yeah, like they're going to have to still, I hope there's still some stuff that they did save. They're going to probably run similar style and try to utilize their weapons in the same way that they did in this game. But do they have some other tricks up their sleeve and some other ways to sort of do it? That remains to be seen. And that's going to be on Chip to figure out. And I do trust him. Like he's gained my trust back after this game to sort of execute that. Along those lines, though, Jake, and you alluded to it, like how bad the Michigan game was. We cannot talk. We can't talk about this game without having some sort of conversation here, even briefly. We can get into it more in the midweek episode. But like, Ryan Day deserves a lot of credit. And I want to preface this conversation by saying like I thought that Kirk Herbstreit, and I didn't really have much to say about Kirk's first comments when he said him on like college or like the selection show a couple weeks back. I know he's had some bad stuff in his post-playing career with Ohio State fans, and that's why he moved out of Columbus and all this different stuff. Like I get there's some tough love there, and it's kind of a weird relationship. But I didn't think like that space was appropriate for him to like sit there and just rag on Ohio State fans more. Like he called them the lunatic fringe. He called them, and like I'm sorry, I can't call Ohio State fans lunatics because they have high expectations. Like I refuse to go there with it. I'm not going to go on any platform and be like, you guys. I might say they're a little. I do think Ohio State fans are a little misguided in thinking like the Michigan game is the only thing that matters. Because if they go win a national championship this year, like that's huge. That matters. Like that matters the most to all these other teams. But I'm not going to call them lunatics, and I'm not going to call them the lunatic fringe because listen, Ohio State has expectations. So what? So do a lot of other teams in the country. They shouldn't be ridiculed because they hold their team to a standard, and they get upset and feel like the coach needs to do a better job, particularly in a game against your biggest rival. I have no problems with the way that fans treat Ryan Day in relation to, like, within reason. You shouldn't be like, vandalizing his house and sending death threats. Like that's the stuff that's the lunatic fringe. But to me, like there's no lunacy in wanting your team to win a national championship and having expectations and the coach not realizing those things. And then you basically just putting the pressure on the coach to do a better job. Like that is college football. That is college sports. That is Ohio State. And I said the same thing about Ross Bjork saying like, well, the expectations are too high. No, there's nothing wrong with having expectations. So I think Kirk was misguided in doing that on that stage. And listen, like when you win, like they did last night, Ryan Day should be getting a lot of love today. And he is getting a lot of love today. He shut a lot of people up and good for him. Like I'm happy he did because like he shut me up, he shut you up, he shut all of us up, and that's good. And now I thought this is what was going to happen. Like the Michigan game was the most fresh thing in our mind. We knew how that game went, and we sat in that for weeks because there was no game afterwards. First came out, they blow out Tennessee in the first round of the playoff, and they showed you like this is who we can be again. And I'm not going to say nobody's going to talk about it because we probably will circle back to this at some point, even us. But like. Now we have something different in our mind, a different set of like a standard, a different idea of what this team can be. And it doesn't excuse the Michigan loss, but we can move past it and start to like see what the potential can be with this team. So like, again, it's inexcusable that he lost to Michigan, but good for him for shutting everybody up. And like all we wanted was him to prove it. And he went out and proved it. The game plan was brilliant. The coaching was brilliant. His team played brilliant. I keep saying the word brilliant throughout this podcast. That maybe somehow get worked into the title of the show. I don't know. But, I mean, props to him, and he does deserve credit for this one. We say he can't win big games. He just gave you one. and he's got to do more. He's got to go beat Oregon now, or I know the pressure is going to be right back on him. But for at least this 24-hour period here, like, yes, he deserves all the props, and Ohio State fans will rightfully give him those, I think.
Yeah, it's not like a complete 180 where you feel like, well, we felt really bad about Ryan Day, probably said, without getting to a national championship, at least his job was on the line. And then you 42-17 Tennessee, and it's like, Ryan Day is an incredible coach. Like, bring him all back. We love everything he's done. Like, no, there's still a lot that you have to pick out there. But that's a big game. College football playoffs, no matter what the stage is, if you're an 8 seed going against a 9, or, you're in the national championship, it's a big stage. Those are games that as soon as you lose, your season is effectively over. Like, they're immediately, you're done. Tennessee won't play another game this year. That's it.
Especially, sorry, especially when how much was said and what we saw from like Tennessee fans who showed up to that game, and it was like, oh, they're going to make this feel like a home game for Tennessee and all this different stuff. Like, there was some pressure because Ohio State fans maybe weren't even really showing up to support you fully that like they normally would. And yeah, like he still went out and they dominated yesterday.
Yeah, it's, again, the biggest stage you could possibly be on is the college football playoffs. So these games obviously get bigger magnitude as you go, but this is still a massive game. Ryan Day proved, and Spencer, I texted you exactly this. It's not, you can't win the big game. That's how you prove, hey, if you want me to win a big game, I'll show you exactly how it's done. Ryan Day sort of shut everybody up, at least for a week. I don't think this is saving Ryan Day's job or anything like that.
No.
Like, you still got to go out and do more, but you're in a much better spot going up against Oregon than you were, let's say, 2 days ago.
Yeah.
Fans feel a lot better about it.
Like, the pressure's still on from the fan base. We know what Ross Bjork said. It doesn't sound like his job is really in jeopardy, but we know the fan base will be clamoring for it if they lose, like in the playoff, and they don't actually. If they get to the national championship, I think people would at least like understand a little bit more. So yeah, like this could all come back to a head, but for at least this time, this period of time, the way they played, big stage, you beat Tennessee, he shuts everybody up. And listen, if he doesn't go and beat Oregon, it's going to come right back to the surface, and people are going to be like, he still can't win certain big games and whatever, and there's going to be criticism, and he's going to have to live with those things. But on the flip side, if he beats Oregon, I think this completely flips from like not saying there won't be people who still are going to demand a national championship, but I do think it'll flip from like, all right, I think there'll be more of an acceptance of Ryan Day again, and more like glad handing of Ryan Day than there has been even in recent years, because he'll have won back-to-back games that like really meant something on major stages. And so yeah, like it's all about healing. Like it's still a touch and go relationship, but each win that he gets in this playoff, and if they finish it off with the title, that is steps towards healing his relationship with the fan base. And that, and it's not like a relationship in the sense of like he tarnished it because of anything he did. It's just, because fans have high expectations for him. So yeah, like I think that's what this process is about for Ryan Day. And in terms of like checking the boxes, box number 1 checked, passed with flying colors.
Yeah, it's a lot of it comes back to, obviously, the relationship is you have your 3 goals for the season: Michigan Big Ten championship, national championship. Well, you've dropped the first 2. That's, like that comes back to the expectation thing. Those aren't the biggest of expectations. Beating Michigan and playing in a Big Ten championship game, at least winning it, I know is the expectation, but at least playing in it are like fairly low expectations. Like for an Ohio State team in the current format where you basically beat Michigan and you would have been in, like, I don't know. I feel like that's it, but you have your chance for the national championship. I think it is sort of like this healing process that you said, where every single game it gets better for Ryan Day. I think a lot of fans will be able to appreciate if he gets to a national championship. If his team plays well in a national championship, win or lose, I think it's a much different story, because the big thing with Ryan was it was always, you can't beat Michigan, you can't win the big game. You can't have both, right? If you're going to have one, you at least got to be able to do the other. And if you can at least prove, hey, the big games have just not gone my way, here's what we can do. Like, here's what I can bring to the table. We'll figure out Michigan as we go. I think fans can at least, chew on that a little bit and realize, all right, there's a little bit more here. We can give them a little bit of a leash, but you still got to go beat Michigan. it's so much better off than if you can't win the big one and you can't beat Michigan. Yeah, like
well, in that process,
nothing.
That process I think is going to come with time. Like as we get more and deeper into the 12, maybe 14 team era, like people are going to have to accept that like a national championship can mean more than the Michigan game. But we'll get there. Speaking of that, this is so much better than a 1 versus 2 national championship. College football playoff format is great. There was a lot of complaints about the games being blowouts. I get it. I did notice though Lane Kiffin had nothing to say about Tennessee getting blown out. He just had comments about all the other teams that got blown out and how his team should have been in. But he wasn't going to crap on a fellow SEC team, I guess, for also being blown out in the first round. Radu says he's going to give Ryan Day credit for yesterday. This one made me chuckle. Josh, what is it? Hopeful? I always forget. I always say it wrong. The Tennessee coach looks like
don't turn to me for pronunciation.
And then Radu says that Freddie Kitchens, Josh Hopel, and Nick Wilson all look the same. That's funny. And then I don't think we need 12 teams. Best 8 teams, no buys. So what's interesting about this is from the start I said 8 teams should be the playoff. But I get why they went to 12. I'm never going to complain about more football. And guys, I don't want to go into this too deep, but the point was they prove it on the field. And if the games are blowouts, the games are blowouts. The point was always like you can't measure certain teams against other teams because the schedules are all so different. Okay, well, let's put a team like Boise State in and see if they can actually keep up with the big dogs of the world. So we're going to get that next week or the next game against Penn State. Like, that was the point. They get to prove it on the field rather than just an arbitrary system where a computer decides or a committee decides who are the best 4 teams. So
yeah,
we'll elaborate on it some more, but that's my thoughts on how the weekend went, I think, as a whole.
Yeah, I think a lot of people can look at that, though, and be like, 12-team playoffs and every single favorite one. Like,
oh. Did we know that? Did we expect that? I don't know. Well, like I said, we'll talk about it more. I don't want to exhaust too much time on this right now because we want to keep this kind of tight. But, guys, we appreciate you stopping by and reacting to the Buckeyes win over Tennessee last night with us. We will be back with a midweek episode. I'm going to work to try to get Alec Dietz on again. He covers the Oregon Ducks, and we thought we'd always have a chance to have him on again. So this will be our opportunity getting ready for the Rose Bowl. We'll preview that a little bit with you. Yeah, we'll see. We'll have to actually talk about schedules because it just crossed my mind that this is Christmas week. I forgot about that. There's an important holiday coming, so I don't know. I don't know if we'll be doing a midweek episode like normal. It might be later in the week, but we'll figure out the schedule and what that all looks like. Maybe we'll do like
Wednesday doesn't work for you?
Probably not. No. And my wife would kill me. But we'll try to do something probably end of the week and then early next week as well, leading up to the game. But guys, we implore you to please like, follow, subscribe, review the Sons of the Shoe podcast wherever you get your podcast: Apple, Spotify, the Odyssey app. Did I mention Apple? And of course, at the 92.3 The Fan YouTube channel, where many of you are watching this right now. Thank you for stopping by. Big winners for the Buckeyes. Ryan Day shut some people up. Will Howard played great. Can they take this all the way to a national championship? We will find out in the weeks ahead, and we will talk about it with you right here on Sons of the Shoe.